Hello. Kia ora e te whānau, which means hello my family. It's kind of hello friends, hello close ones. So welcome back, followers and maybe some new viewers as well. This is, I think this is part 3 now of, part 3 of a video on neurodiversity. And the last episode we talked mainly about ADHD, and I had a kind of premonition at the end that I might want to return to that a little bit, just to make a few other additional points. I'm also aware that I kind of mysteriously alluded to some helpful things that I do to help manage my ADHD. I didn't say what they were, which could be quite frustrating, I guess. I want to be kind of careful with this because diet, nutrition, that kind of thing is not something I've got great knowledge of. So I tend to rely on other people for recommendations, but I can tell you what I do. Or some of the things that I do. One of the things that I do is the foods that I favour. I eat loads and loads of almonds because they're really good for dopamine production. And I eat loads and loads of black chocolate. I mean, I love any kind of chocolate really, but I have the really high cocoa content black chocolate. I think it's 80%, but it goes, if I can go higher than that, if I see chocolate higher than 80%, then I'll buy that. It's not always the nicest chocolate. It's I mean, I like the bitterness of dark chocolate, but it can be a bit cloying. It doesn't melt in the mouth like milk chocolate does. So if you're new to dark chocolate, just top tip is put smaller pieces in your mouth, and sometimes maybe have it with a drink so that it melts. Otherwise, it can kind of stick to the roof of your mouth, which isn't the nicest of sensations. And I take something called L-tyrosine, which is more or less the closest thing I think you can get to sort of dopamine in a bottle from a health food shop. I take that, and I do notice the difference when I come off that, usually in mood. So that's some of the things that I do. Go careful with caffeine. Sleep's really important as well. So it's really important to try and get good sleep, which I don't always succeed in, but I can certainly tell the difference when I've had good sleep. So something else just to add to ADHD, which is a really interesting theory. Whether this is true, again, this is evolutionary psychology, I guess. One theory is that people with ADHD or ADD, whatever you want to call it, are throwbacks to human hunters. So if you think about human evolution, we were hunter-gatherers for quite a long time. Don't know whether it was. I'm not great on my spans of time and the different eons of human development, but more than a few years, human beings were hunter-gatherers, and then kind of more recently, and for a comparatively shorter time, we have become farmers. And farmers need to be quite kind of patient, steady-minded people, willing to put up with fairly sort of tedious toil. Kind of you plough up the field, and you plough down the field, and you plough up the field, and you plough down the field, and you plough up the field, and you plough down the field, and then you wait, and you wait, and you get my drift. Whereas hunter-gatherers are a bit more, which kind of makes sense. So one of the things about being ADHD is being easily distracted. Well, that's actually a great thing if you're a hunter-gatherer, if you're in the bush or the jungle, whatever you want to call it. We call it the bush here in New Zealand, which kind of does have some other connotations in other parts of the world, and you see something at the corner of your eye, or you hear a kind of a very subtle noise, rustling of the foliage, then you're onto it straight away, because that could be prey. So interesting, and I guess there's not that much call for hunters today. Hunting sort of seems to be quite a big thing in New Zealand, which it wasn't in the UK, so it's just quite interesting. But jobs where you have to respond in the moment to what's going on around you. So I mentioned firemen, I mentioned or women, I mentioned police. I don't think I mentioned the military, but that's part of it. And I did mention comedy, and comedy is something where you have to respond. You have to be comedy. Good comedy is a very mindful art. I'm just aware that I've got the colours in Markie behind me on the wall, and that's a little tad distracting. And because I've got ADHD, I'm allowed to be distracted and to remove the distraction. That's a good example of managing my ADHD. There we go. ADHD management in action. So, what was I saying? Military comedy, comedy. Comedians often do have scripts, but actually, the real kind of one of the secrets to good comedy is you have to be present and in the moment. I'll do some videos on comedy coaching, and you have to respond to what's going on, and you have to. The good comedians will be very aware of the mood of the audience, the surroundings, everything, and we'll kind of feed into that and use that. So if you've got that kind of almost like a hypervigilance kind of thing of noticing all kinds of things at once, that's another useful thing. So ADHD, a disability or just a difference, I think probably more of it. When I talked about dyspraxia, I think dyspraxia does seem to be more of a disability. If you want to argue with me on that, I'd love to hear what you've got to say, because I'd be really interested in that. ADHD, definitely brings lots of gifts, and if you can't find those gifts, then I would suggest kind of search for them. It's about kind of being a square peg in a round hole and seeking out a square hole. That's really what the journey. That's what it's like if you're neurodiverse. You have to find the right environment. If you put somebody with neurodiversity in the right environment, then they really thrive. If they're in the wrong environment, then it can be horrible. So that's a little bit about ADHD. It's often treated by medication. That's very controversial because lots of children get diagnosed with it, especially in the USA, and they get put on this medication, which basically is pretty much the same as speed. It has the opposite effect on them that it would on somebody that's neurotypical. Somebody neurotypical on speed, they go a bit crazy. They can get hyperactive. If you put somebody that's got ADHD and they're hyperactive on speed, then often it has a settling effect. So I'm not going to get into the pros and cons of medication because that's a whole big subject. My kind of advice would be, if you've got any of these conditions, consult specialists, consult experts, have an open mind, do lots of research, and choose what you do, what you wish. Really, make your own choices. So, but that's the kind of thing that's often spoken about ADHD. Also, lots of people say, oh, there's no such thing as ADHD, they're just naughty children, but it applies to adults as well. It doesn't go away in adults. Sometimes people learn to manage better. I mean, usually I think people learn to manage it better. So it doesn't present as much, or it's not so obvious in adults, but it's still there in adults. And for those of you who say, oh, ADHD doesn't exist, it's a fallacy, children just need a good hiding, or whatever it is you think. ADHD is actually provable with brain scans. You can actually pick it up in brain scans. So it's something. You can form your own opinion about what it might be. There's a guy called Gabor Marcy. I think I'm pronouncing his name correctly. He's a doctor. I think he's out in Canada. I think he's of something like Bulgarian extraction. He's a very charismatic speaker in a very kind of French kind of way. I mean, he's kind of quite dry, but very watchable. And he has some very interesting things to say about ADHD. He claims to have ADHD himself, and I think his children have it as well. And he thinks that it is caused by life experiences, early childhood experiences. Whereas the general tendency is to think that ADHD is something that's more physiological, something that we're more that we're born with. I have a very open mind about that. I think with all these neurodiversities, I think the thing to remember, which neuroscience is telling us more and more and more and more, is that the brain is not a fully formed, it's not fully formed and all perfect and complete when we're born. It actually is developing over quite a long time after we're born. So organic physiological things that can be, could be potentially looked at and measured, changes in the physical things in the brain, can have their root in experiences, because life experiences affect the development of the brain. So these things aren't mutually exclusive. Now, this is a very, I haven't even got into dyslexia yet, which is what I was going to talk about next. And I've already reached the 10-minute mark, but I hope that's a useful kind of ADHD part 2. So I will say farewell to you for a short while and then come back and we'll talk a bit more about dyslexia and some of the others. See you later.